Bryan McGannon. As Marvin pointed out, I'm the Director of Policy for ASBC, and I'm thrilled to have you on the phone on our webinar for the sexiest of sexy issues, regulatory reform. We are pleased to have one of the nation's foremost experts on public opinion and messaging, Celinda Lake, as our featured presenter. First, I'd like to lay out some context for the call and why we at ASBC see this as a critical issue for building a sustainable economy. Regulations are the guardrails of our economy. They put reasonable limits on behavior so that everyone plays by the same rules. Regulations are the byproducts of the legislative process. Lawmakers enact laws and direct agencies who have the subject matter expertise to provide the specific and often scientific details to implement the law. Regulations protect the public and protect the marketplace for fair competition. Regulations also spur innovation. Think about the controls industry, largely created after passage of the Clean Air Act. These are the people that developed the technology to put scrubbers on power plants that reduced significantly air pollution. However, major industries, polluters, and those who bear a significant share of the responsibility for the great are intent on undermining the regulatory process at the federal level. While the regulatory process is not perfect, ASBC believes that clearly written, fairly enforced, and done in a transparent manner, rules are necessary for our modern economy. So after Celinda's presentation, I'll discuss some immediate threats and how we can work together. Back again quickly. Okay, so Celinda Lake is one of the nation's leading political strategists, serving as a tactician and senior advisor to dozens of Democratic incumbents and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. Celinda and her firm, Lake Research Partners, are known for cutting-edge research on issues including the economy, healthcare, the environment, and education. So with that, Celinda, take it away.
Thank you so much, and sorry to interrupt you. Getting over this cold. It's very, very exciting to be with you, and very exciting to be working again with you all, because you do such great work on the environment, on regulation, and this is such an important voice, the voice of small business, a really, really critical voice in this period. So what I'm going to do is share with you some overall research, thanks primarily to the Bauman Foundation on regulation, share with you some views that people have about climate change, and then some views that people have about health care, as I think two of the areas that you all are very engaged in right now. So if we look at the first slide, what you can see is, first of all, one of the things that I love about regulation is that conventional wisdom is like about 95% wrong, plus or minus 5%. So it used to be there was a time when we had to have all kinds of euphemisms for regulation, rules, safeguards, protections, etc. That's all fine, but actually regulations test pretty positively. So 58% of the voters are favorable toward regulation, only 29% are unfavorable, even when we don't say specifically what the regulations are about, just regulations as regulations. And in fact, regulations is almost as popular as rules and more popular than standards, two of the other euphemisms we tend to use. Secondly, one of the things that we did was working with SIX and the Bauman Foundation and others, we explored new frames around regulation, and we found actually that the strongest frame out there is enforcement. What voters felt overwhelmingly is that enforcement was not being done well enough, that if you were a big corporation, you could absorb the fines and pass it on to your customers, or it didn't affect the CEO's bonuses, that if you were, you escaped the regulations by lobbying and a myriad of other ways. And that what that was profoundly unfair, particularly to small businesses, and didn't protect people very well. If you look at slide 4, you'll see that 71% of voters said that it would be good to have increased enforcement of the nation's laws and regulations. And that was a strongly bipartisan notion. 79% of Democrats, 73% of independents, and even 63% of Republicans said that was a good idea. Notice we said nation here, which suggests federal regulations. And secondly, we haven't said what these regulations are for, and it's still overwhelmingly popular. Every demographic and political group agreed there should be increased enforcement. Looking at the next slide, we looked at what are the frames that work in terms of testing and increased enforcement. And people like the term common sense, that it was fair and more equal, that it was tougher, and also proper, by the way, which was kind of an interesting notion that was so strong for people. We also said, okay, this is very, very popular with people, but will it sustain an attack? What happens when we're in a competitive arena? And if we look at slide 6, you can see the slide. Some people say we need fair and tougher enforcement of regulations in the U.S. to protect American workers and families and to give the little guys, including small businesses, a fair chance to compete. Other people say we need fewer burdensome government regulations because these regulations only work to make things more difficult for small businesses and individuals to create jobs and economic growth. Now, this was a very competitive debate, but we still won it 50 to 43. And notice one of the things that was important here was bringing small business into our side of the equation. Progressives do not use small business enough as part of their spokespeople, as part of their branding, and invariably it's one of the strongest parts. Given what's been going on nationally in particular and what they have been doing with the different resolutions and the government contracting piece of the House and Senate, the next slide, slide 7, will stun you. This was rating different organizations. And you'll notice, first of all, that all of these regulatory agencies, including the EPA, very popular with people. And notice the one they're going after right now, OSHA, the most popular agency that we tested in terms of net favorability, followed by the Consumer Protection Safety Commission. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, popular but not as well known as other agencies. So regulatory agencies in the federal government, very popular, including the ones they're going after right now. We looked at what are the positive attributes on slide 8 of regulations, and we found that the strongest things that people think are they can prevent deadly mistakes and save lives, they protect the most vulnerable, seniors and children, they reduce pollution in the air, the land, and the water, and air and water pollution, by the way, very, very popular with people. They can both reduce it and prevent it. And by the way, as you'll see in a moment, prevention, very, very powerful frame, particularly to women. Men want to fix things, but they're okay if they break and then we'll fix them. Women want to prevent bad things from happening. Ensuring oversight of dangerous foreign imports. This was a particularly positive notion with Trump voters, who, as you know, pretty nationalistic. Holding big businesses and corporations accountable, holding business accountable, and preventing the financial markets from harming the U.S. economy. Now notice the latter is weaker. And people believe and should have prevented the economic crisis. They did a very poor job of doing it last time. And contrary to Beltway sentiment, all of the consumer financial protections on Wall Street, another economic crisis would happen in the next 4 years. We then on slide 9 looked at where are the most important arenas for enforcement. And we asked people to rate this on a scale from 0 to 10. Here you can see those that are rated an absolute 10 and those that are 8 to 10, so very, very high ratings. Notice clean water, foods and drugs, government, civil rights, discrimination, nuclear power plants, and Wall Street banks and financial industry are the #1 areas where people want tough enforcement and believe that enforcement of regulations is very, very important. And it includes a variety of things. Clean water and clean air, which are very strong with people, and people don't think that they're regulated enough. They think that the air and water are cleaner, but that they should be still cleaner. And they believe that a lot of the problems have gotten less visible. Civil rights and discrimination, not supposed to be very popular with the public, in fact, very popular with the public. Food and drugs, nuclear power plants, really driven by women who think that nuclear energy is very dangerous. And then notice the Wall Street banks and financial industry, again reflecting the fact that people thought that that the financial crisis was on the horizon and not prevented. The next chart, chart 10, shows you yet another group of industries that are just slightly below the first tier, including clean air, workplace safety, credit card companies, gas prices and oil companies, the lending industry, special interests, and the home mortgage industry. So a huge arena of different kinds of actors that directly affect people, where people think tough enforcement is very important. So the first conclusion is regulations are popular. Tough enforcement of regulations is a popular frame, and people want it in lots of different areas to protect their families, their workplaces, and even the federal agencies are popular, even with Republicans who do this enforcement work. Where does that leave us in terms of clean energy, climate change, etc.? Well, first of all, people believe that everybody should be playing a role with climate change, and much of this work has been done for Eco-America. Many of you I know involved in the Eco-America Coalition. All of the data is on their website if you want the full report. But people think federal government, 82%, state and local government, 82%, and American businesses, 86%, should play a great deal or some role in the climate change issue. On slide 13, you see that Americans strongly favor a number of policies to reduce the pollution that causes climate change. 72% favor that, government taking action, 49% strongly. People support putting limits on pollution, and people support reducing carbon pollution by fining companies who pollute. Pollution, well, I know there are some experts who argue with that term. Pollution is a very, very powerful frame for talking about the climate change and clean energy realm. Another strong frame, by the way, is preventing damage to the climate, which is some of the strongest new messaging. It really galvanizes women who want the prevention frame, and it increases people's sense of urgency. One of the problems that we have here is that many people think, well, I can do that tomorrow. I have to take care of X, Y, and Z today. I'll take care of the climate tomorrow. Damage to the climate ups people's sense of urgency. They don't want to see more damage done to the climate. If we look at the next slide, we see that the public increasingly concerned about renewable energy, rising global temperatures, and would make an investment in state renewable energy requirements. Notice you have 74% of the public thinking that state governments should require a set proportion of all electricity to come from renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power. And states also voters love the goal of saying our state is going to become majority renewable energy by X date. Almost every state we've tested that in has found that very, very popular. Now, we have not tested it in some places like West Virginia, but in general, even some energy-dependent states like Montana, very, very popular to say that. In addition, by the way, a secret fact that I will share with you, The Trump voters are very clean energy oriented. They love clean energy. They think it'll be energy independence. They think it'll be homegrown jobs, and they love clean energy because they think that is the wave of the future. Notice this willingness to take action, very highly correlated with whether or not you think that the Earth is warming or that it's not warming. And if you think the Earth is warming, which the vast majority of people do, then you're much, much more in favor of setting renewable energy standards. The next slide shows you that a majority of Americans, and thanks to a lot of the work that many of you have been involved in, this is a pretty bipartisan sentiment. Democrats, majority of Republicans, and independents all support this, and independents resemble even more than they resemble Republicans. The most powerful way to talk about this is a clean power plan that is designed to reduce greenhouse gases from existing power plants, give states flexibility on how to do it through negotiations with the federal government, and that's very, very popular. 60% of Republicans like that policy. If we look at the next slide, you can see excuse me, two other powerful policies requiring a set proportion of electricity to come from renewable energy. 79% of voters support that. Increasing energy efficiency, 84% of voters support that. Energy efficiency is off the charts. It's so popular now, it's almost a core concept value more than a policy concept. Increasing taxes on all fossil fuels, not that popular. Just in case you thought we talked to some strange set of voters from Mars who were having odd attitudes, 59% did oppose increasing taxes on all fossil fuels. Part of that is because people think that wages have not kept up with the cost of living, and they're frankly just concerned about increasing costs and increasing taxes, period. And people also have some reservations about buying and selling permits to release greenhouse gases, known as cap and trade. Part of that is you also have a very substantial number of voters who aren't really clear about what cap and trade is. But really, rather than trade off, what voters would like to incentivize is just moving to renewable energy, clean energy, and less pollution, rather than trading it off. The last area I want to share some research with you on is the whole health care and prescription drug prices. And just to set the tone for you, new polling out today that shows that ACA overall, while it has improved, is still unpopular. 40% popular, 49% unpopular. But the Republican health care plan, even more unpopular. Only a third of the voters, 37%, like the Republican health care plan. That's just basically the hardcore Republicans. People are very, very concerned about protecting the provisions of ACA that limit caps on cancer treatment, eliminate pre-existing conditions, insure all children, allow your children to 26. All of those are very, very popular with people. And if anything, we're not using enough to cap on cancer, which is the most popular provision. People also are very worried about throwing 22, 24 million people off health care and taking away their health care with no alternative in plan. And people like Medicaid a great deal. Medicaid is more popular than most of the Congress people who are opposing it. And even in deeply red states, Medicaid's favorability has been anywhere from 59 to 65%. And that includes polling in Maine, Nebraska, Montana, some pretty conservative areas, some areas that went at Missouri, some states that went solidly for Donald Trump. One of the most popular policies out there is lowering prescription drug costs. And we have done some work on this. with a coalition in the states run by Soros Foundation. The Small Business Alliance has also done some polling on this with small business owners. And Kaiser Family Foundation, that's on chart 18, has done quite a bit of polling on this. And one of the things you see is that this is a very, very bipartisan policy. In fact, until quite recently, Republicans actually rated dealing with prescription drug prices ahead of doing away with the ACA. Now it's slightly behind it, but solid majority of Republicans favor of it. People like the idea of transparency, where the prices are set, allowing the federal government to negotiate lower prices for Medicare, limiting the amount drug companies can charge for high-cost drugs for illnesses like cancer, allowing Americans for reimportation, creating an independent group that oversees the price of prescription drugs. All of those policies very, very popular with people. People also are furious about what they perceive to be the iron triangle between campaign finance contributions, lobbying, and high drug fees. And, of course, they all know, and everybody has heard of different policy or different examples from EpiPens to different kinds of drugs that have seen their prices shoot up, completely unrelated to research and development or any kind of merit. People are also very, very militant when they hear that taxpayer money has been used to develop the drug. If it's all private money developing the drug, then they think, I hate it, but I'm not so sure what I can do about it. If any taxpayer dollars have been used in development of the drug, people are very aggressive and believe they can be very interventionist. On the next slide, you'll see a number of policies, and you can look at that far right-hand corner. You'll see these are solidly bipartisan policies. The Republicans supporting these policies, 74 to 79%, and they include reducing the monopoly on prescription drugs to provide generic drugs, the disclosure element, the being able to provide alternatives and prescribe different drugs at lower cost, and regulating patents. All of these policies wildly, wildly favored by the public. And even though the public doesn't know exactly how this works, they're very, very strongly in favor of it. When we looked at small businesses in healthcare, we found, first of all, that small businesses firmly believe that they are at a disadvantage when it comes to trying to find the right health insurance plan. 79% of small businesses say they believe that. It's true. Small business owners also very much in favor of a number of prescription drug reform. And again, you can see in the right-hand column, these are numbers on slide 21 are not of voters like the previous numbers that you saw, but are all small businesses. And you can see here how positive transparency, reimportation, negotiation, and ending certain kinds of other practices are very, very popular with small businesses. Anywhere from 82 to 90% support. Last thing, we are engaged, obviously, in a period of very, very aggressive attacks, both in these two areas and in the general area of regulation. And so we looked at, with, again, the Sixth Coalition and the Bauman Foundation, on what are strong messages on regulation. And we looked at people who are based, people who support regulation no matter what, the persuadables, which are a huge number of the public, and opposition, people who oppose regulation no matter what. Notice nearly 16% of the public who oppose regulation no matter what. This next chart, and obviously you can get all of these charts, is the message triangle that we developed in support of regulation that was energized the base and moved the persuadables. the first half of the triangle is protecting health and safety. And by the way, case studies are more popular with people than individual people. We often talk about putting a face on regulation, but often when it's just an individual case, people try to fix the person rather than the situation. With case studies, people tend to think, well, gosh, I could have been in that situation. That could happen to anyone. And you'll see here 2 case studies, toxic chemical dumping in West Virginia and the fertilizer facility in West Texas that are being used here. A second very strong area is preventing economic disaster. And you want to frame that as tough enforcement restores the balance here. It restores a level playing field. You don't want people to think that regulation, that economic crises just happen. You want to drive home for people that they are created and they can be uncreated or prevented. And finally, it always helps to give examples of where enforcement works. And small businesses giving these examples are the most powerful spokespeople. People really think, wow, if the small businesses like it, and then it really must work. It really must be good. On the next chart, you can see our top testing message out of this research. This was for broadly supporting enforcement of our regulations. And you can see the dials over to the right, the base, the orange line, opposition, and persuadable. Enforcement of our laws is about safeguarding Americans. And when done properly, enforcement can prevent economic catastrophe, protect our health, and save our lives. Then we had the case studies, and then we close with, we need strong and improved enforcement to prevent deadly situations like these from threatening American communities. Tough but fair enforcement of our laws helps keep America safe from physical and economic harm. Some of the language that works very well in this debate when you're talking about regulation: we can't trust big corporations and businesses to police themselves. Protect health and save lives. Big corporations promote profits above the health and safety of Americans. Big corporations, not just ordinary Americans, need to be held accountable. Our system is out of balance, favoring the wealthy and powerful over ordinary Americans and small businesses. Industry lobbyists are easily able to buy politicians. Effective enforcement of regulations can create jobs and good wages. People don't think they cost jobs and good wages. They think they create jobs. Safeguard Americans from economic catastrophe. Invest in water structure will create hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs. And this is a new area that's really soaring as our cities are dealing with contaminated water. And the benefits of fair regulation far exceed the cost. What's interesting is that there are really 2 arguments that work against us that we have to be careful of. And you are at the center of one of them. So costing jobs doesn't really work that well. People don't think regulations cost jobs. They think they could create jobs. Shutting down small businesses does worry people. And small businesses being in favor of regulations is literally the most powerful spokesperson we have. The other is cost. People worry a lot more about costing them either in taxes and money than they do about actually costing their job. But people also believe that the lack of regulation can cost money and taxes as well. So a very fast tour of the landscape. I want to turn it back over, but hopefully 3 things have come through. 1, conventional wisdom is completely wrong. Tough enforcement, increased enforcement is very popular with the public. The public likes regulations, and the public believes that regulations can prevent harm and keep us safe. Secondly, all of the federal agencies that are involved in regulation are way more popular than they are presumed to be, and more popular than either political party at this point. Their in every area of regulation, small business is the most powerful voice. You have enormous, enormous power and a huge job to do in terms of legitimizing regulation, establishing the frame and the populist frame of fairness, because you are at the very center of fairness in their minds, and talking about preventing harm and safeguarding our public and our small businesses. So let me stop there, turn it back over, and delighted to take questions and answers.
Thank you, Celinda. All right, everyone. The way we're going to do questions are two things. You can either, one, go into the chat box and type in your questions there, or two, you can raise your hand and we'll go from there. And we are going to go with our first question. Terry Gibbs, we're going to unmute you. And once we do that, you'll be able to ask your question. Okay, Terry, you should be unmuted. You should be able to say something. Terry? All right, while we wait for Terry, is there anyone else that has a question? If you guys want to type those into the question box or raise your hand, feel free to do so. Okay, Greg. Greg, you should be unmuted. Greg Hamra, your hand is raised. Oh, your audio is coming in quite bad. We can't understand. Okay, if you want to try typing that in, that'd be great. Anyone else have any questions?
One more question.
Okay, Terry, you're still unmuted. You should be. Terry Gibbs? Okay.
Okay, so we're not sure if there's shortage of questions, but we are having some challenge getting the questioners online. So in the meantime, this is Bryan McGannon again. I want to thank Celinda Lake, and if you hold on just a minute, Celinda, maybe we can get this fixed, but I want to move to the...
No problem at all.
Thank you. What ASBC is engaged in a regulation. So ASBC clearly has been fighting existing regulations in the clean energy and climate space through the Clean Air Act regulations, whether it's Clean Power Plan, methane rules, and those existing EPA rules. Clean Water and the WOTUS rule were some of where we're very active around. And we have weighed in at various times on the Consumer Financial Protection Board as well as Department of Labor rules. This campaign that we're about to launch is a kind of a meta level regulatory reform action. Is based on these bills that are going to be moving through Congress, through the Senate specifically, that disrupt the existing regulatory process. So this is how regulations are made, and so there's three main bills that the Senate will be taking up that we're watching. One is called the Midnight Rules Relief Act, and that would give Congress a kind of a sweeping power to undo late-term regulations from a previous administration, so they could in one vote undo 40 or 50 or however many they wanted Obama-era regulations. It's kind of a blunt instrument. The regulations from the executive in need of scrutiny, called the REINS Act. That's a cute acronym for REINS. And that would give Congress the authority in various iterations that they've introduced this bill. This most latest version is the most dangerous, which would force Congress to ratify a final rule promulgated by an agency. And if Congress did not take action, the rule would not go into force. So that's there's a separation of powers issue with that, but it's still incredibly damaging to the process. And those two bills, we think, have there's a decent understanding within the Senate that there's enough votes to block those two without too much rancor. The third one is the one that we're most concerned with and we're focusing our efforts around, and that is called the Regulatory Accountability Act, which is on its face, it seems to be a mild version of regulatory reform. It just, the authors would claim that it just does tweaks to the system, but ultimately what it does do is break the regulatory system. One of the features of it is to include cost-benefit analysis, which has been, in many cases, lead to paralysis by analysis, as you would use in the former Tosca world. It would put the regulatory agencies in a perpetual cycle of finding the lowest cost alternative to a regulation, and that has proven in the past to be ties up the agency in knots and effectively stops the rulemaking process. The Regulatory Accountability Act, because it has some appearance of being modest relative to these other extreme bills, possibly is currying favor with moderates that would reach the 60-vote threshold in the Senate. So we are focusing our effort on the Senate to make sure that this Regulatory Accountability Act doesn't move forward. So we will be sending out a campaign sign-on in the next day or two, as soon as we get it up on the website. And we encourage everyone to tune into this important fight. It is a little bit arcane, but as Celinda noted, we'll be developing some case studies to explain in real terms why we need the regulatory process and why we cannot afford to tie the system up indefinitely. So looks like we will go back to questions.
Yep. Okay, Celinda, we have a question for you here from Greg Hamra. What about the use of the word protections instead of regs?
Protection tests well, but regulations test just as well. Protection tests better as a verb than a noun. So it tests better to say that the regulations are going to protect people, safeguard people, prevent things. That actually was the best testing formulation. In part because you inoculate against a bunch of the attacks. What they're just talking about is regulations. Yeah, that is exactly what we're talking about. So we don't have to avoid the word regulation. And it's just better to use these other concepts as the verb attached to the regulation, if that makes sense.
And Richard Walton, you're off the mute.
Okay, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I just had a question about did you test a distinction between cap and trade versus putting a price on carbon, the language of, carbon pricing versus carbon taxing and versus cap and trade? Was there any distinction there at all?
Oh, that has been done. We didn't do this cap and trade language. We pulled it actually from other work that had been done and was publicly released because we couldn't get the other data released. But you're absolutely right. The way that you frame it, in part because people don't know exactly what it is, the language that you use to talk about it makes a huge difference. So that's a really good flag. You're absolutely right.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Miss Luna Lewis, you're off the mute. You should be able to answer your question. Luana, sorry. Okay, well, I'll read her question. What do people think fairness is in this context?
Oh, that's a really, really good question, and we actually explored it because it wasn't what we thought it meant originally. And you are all front and center on fairness. So the number one aspect of fairness that people thought was the little guy, which includes the ordinary individual or the small business, has to pay the fine, has to follow the rules, but the big guy hires the lobbyist, avoids it, hires the accountant, just builds the fine into their their economic model and passes it on to us. So we were really surprised. That isn't what we expected that they meant by fairness. And what they meant was also notions like level playing field and that the rules are enforced on the big guys as well as the little guys, and that there's tough, fair, meaning equal enforcement. So we were really surprised. That's not what we thought it meant, but we did explore that in the research, and that's what they meant.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, that was all the one last question. The question was, where can you find more information about this? The ASBC, we have our work on regulations on top of, we'll have this webinar on our website so that you can relook with the slides in the voiceover. On your end, Celinda, where do folks find more information on the research you've done?
So it's different places for different things. So if you are interested in the climate change work, the Eco America website would have that. If you are interested in the general research on prescription drugs, that has not, I don't think that has been released yet. Let me find out if it has, and if it has, I will find out where you can get the public piece of that. And then I think for the general regulatory studies, probably the best person to reach out to, and I'm having trouble picking up his, I'm having trouble getting my Rolodex to work, but I will send it to you all, is Rick Meldeff at the Coalition for Enforcement. So let us find out about the prescription drugs, and let us get you Rick's contact information, and then you all can get it. And you can reach out to him directly. He'd be very glad to share it with you.
Terrific. Well, once again, Bryan McGannon, I want to thank Celinda Lake for a fantastic presentation. We will have this information up on our website, and we will be sending out an action for the Regulatory Accountability Act, and we anticipate this to be moving in the next 6 to 8 weeks in the Senate, so we hope to be able to make an impact on the debate. So we will have more details about that, and want to thank everybody for participating today, and look forward to future webcasts. We have a webcast this Thursday on federal carbon pricing initiatives. So if you need any more information about that, feel free to contact us. Once again, thank you for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.